Senator Cornyn.
Mr. Vought, thank you for your willingness to serve the nation again, and especially to you and your family. You know that this job comes with it's more than its fair share of abuse that you receive, but I believe this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to do what we need to do to get our spending in check and to and to make sure that we do what you said, I think, at the beginning of your testimony, which is the most important thing the federal government does, is provide for the security and safety of the American people. You remember 15 years ago, Admiral Mullen, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said the biggest threat to our national security was our debt. Now, when he said that, I thought that was kind of an unusual thing to say, but if you think of it as a prediction, it's literally become true because now we spend more money on interest on the national debt than we do on defense. And that is a recipe for disaster in what I think is the most dangerous world we've seen since World War II. But let me take you back to the issue of inflation. We've just come off of a 40-year high inflation rate for the American people, which is sort of a silent tax, which degrades the standard of living for all Americans. And how is inflation related to government spending?
Well, thank you, Senator. This is an important moment in historic for our country to be able to get a handle on our debt and deficits, and I believe that spending is a big driver of inflation. I think you saw that under the Biden administration when they put forward some of the COVID packages early in his administration. All of a sudden, we had an inflation problem. I predicted it at the time. Larry Summers on the Democrat side predicted at the time, and we saw something that the so-called experts told us we'd never see again, which is inflation at the levels that the American people could not absorb. Nor should they ever be expected to. So I think it's both an energy phenomena, I think it's a regulatory phenomena, and I think it's a spending component.
I think Milton Friedman would agree with you on the spending side, certainly. So the federal government spends roughly $6.75 trillion at the present time. I know none of us can really even get our brain around how much money that is. It's a lot of money. But we also took in last year about $4.5 trillion in revenue. So there's a significant gap between what the federal government spends and what the federal government gets in terms of revenue. Do you think that's sustainable?
No, sir, it is not. We have to get spending under control. I think what we've seen, though, is that revenues have been hovering about where they have been historically as a percentage of GDP, and as a result, the problem is primarily on the spending side, and that's one of the reasons that you've seen in the first term the president put forward substantial numbers of savings and reforms to get a handle on the spending component of the federal budget.
And right now, the Congress appropriates roughly 28% of the money that the federal government spends. The rest of it is mandatory spending and is spent under the tax code, as Senator Johnson pointed out. I don't know how we're ever going to balance the budget just looking at 28% of what the federal government spends. That's not to say we should not look at it, but do you agree with me that we need to look at mandatory spending programs? I understand that Medicare and Social Security, absent bipartisan support, are unlikely to be the sources of any savings on spending. But we spend, I think at last count, roughly $700 billion a year on mandatory spending programs that Congress turns on. It doesn't cap. It doesn't have a cost of living index. It's just based on demand, and they grow at 6, 7, 8%. Do you think we need to look at non-Social Security, non-Medicare mandatory spending to find some of the savings?
Yes, Senator, and it's one of the reasons why there's substantial numbers of savings and reforms. Many of this is getting better outcomes in these programs that were consistent with the president's protection of Social Security and Medicare that still allowed us to get to balance in the budget that we last sent up in the first term. The president's approach has been get after the bureaucracy that's largely wasting money and be able to get people back to work with things like welfare reform and other reforms that we've seen historically work to get better labor force participation and a better economy.
Thank you.